write your release plan and then give yourself awards for executing parts of it. Praise You stands for the 7 most influential gatekeepers in the music industry. If you start 90 days out of release, it means that you're giving yourself enough time to set up the release properly. What would NME tweet about your track and getting it into 140 characters?
Our guest for this episode is Amber Horsburgh, an ex-senior vice president who's worked at Downtown Records, Atlantic Records, MTV, Big Spaceship, and so many other music brands. She's consulted with artists and music managers, helping them to tie in the 360 degrees between playlisting, radio, press, influencer marketing, Spotify, and so much more. She's a really savvy marketer, putting up numbers on Instagram and TikTok. You've probably seen some of her videos if you're looking for the best social media and music marketing tips. So I want you to pay close attention to the Praise You method that Amber teaches inside this episode. There's so many artists that have misconceptions about what a rollout needs to be, how many weeks of rollout, what should they be doing more, teasing the record before it drops or traffic driving after it drops. So in its most basic form from you, Amber, and your experiences, how do you design an artist rollout for an independent, not even for a major label artist?
I start 90 days out, and when I say that, everyone's like, it's so much work. But the reason why I do that is because there's a lot in order to set yourself up for release properly and do it in a way that feels good and doesn't burn you out. I think 90 days is a timeline. Usually when people come into my courses and I'm presenting them with 90 days, they get a bit sticker shock, but I'm really grateful afterwards, because if you start 90 days out of release, it means that you're giving yourself enough time to set up the release properly. You're able to pitch it to the right people. You're able to get all your assets together, all that kind of jazz. But then it gives you enough time to break it down into achievable chunks throughout each of those weeks, so that you arrive to release day feeling energetic, jazzed, excited, and confident that you put your best foot forward, rather than when you get to release and you've got that hangover, like that release hangover of like, oh man, like the way that I structure releases is around a concept which I call the Praise You method. Praise You stands for the 7 most influential gatekeepers in the music industry. Praise You is also just, I took it from a Fatboy Slim record, so there's nothing strategic about the actual name of it, but it's an easy one to remember. And so Praise You stands for promoter, radio, artists, influencers, streaming curators, editors, and useful moguls. So it just basically means, like, when I was at a record label and creating marketing plans for artists, that's what a marketing plan looks like. You have your touring plan, what shows are you playing? You have your radio plan, where is it being serviced, what's the impact date? You have your artist collaborations. Are you doing any remixes, collaborations, guest vocals, making content together? You have your influencer partnerships. That can be brand influencers, that can be social media influencers. You have your streaming plan. So what's happening at Spotify? Are you pitching to third-party playlists? Are you relying on editorial playlists? Is there any digital campaigns that are driving to like follower campaigns on streaming curators? Then you've got your editors, so your music journalists and press, and then useful moguls. I call the useful moguls, which is the music business, because there's a lot of hot air. So it's like, do you have any industry contacts that can open up doors to any of the other gatekeepers? I only need 7, realistically 7 people. You also don't need to have all 7 going at once. So if you're a brand new artist starting out, what I always teach my students is choose one, audit your network first, give yourself a score, 1 out of 5 of your Praise You Club, then decide, okay, who am I going to focus on? And I give resources in my course of how to actually figure out who to focus on, where's the opportunity for you, how do you leverage what makes you uniquely you, in order to be able to pull down these gatekeepers. And then each release just add a different category of gatekeeper until you've released 7 tracks, you have everything firing. But if you try to do everything at once, you'll do nothing well, and you get to that release day going, I'm disappointed with the results, I'm burnt out, I don't want to email any more people, I don't want to do this anymore. And so That's how I structure a release.
That's fire. Honestly, I love the praise you method. That's going to stick in my brain forever. I certainly felt the feeling of overwhelm of, trying to do all of those on a first release will be overwhelming. But I like the way you build it up as building blocks and you attack one, master it, and then build upon that for the future.
Yeah.
When you first work with artists, like which one do you kind of guide them to prioritize first if you can?
Yeah. It depends on where they're at the stage in their career. So I always say no two artists are the same, no two marketing plans should be either. And so what you need to identify is where are you at the stage of your career? How much success have you had to date? In which areas have you had to date? What is the path of least resistance? And so what I then kind of coach them on is, all right, say if you're a brand new artist, well, one of my artists in my course, they are a duo. They're both from very famous bands, but they're starting completely from scratch. So new social channels, new streaming channels, new name, new artwork, new everything. But they both have these quite famous bands. So it's like, okay, how do we leverage what you've both done in those worlds in order to be able to focus your attention? And so for them, radio would make a really great sense because they both played on radio and they've got all of that support already built up and all of that great will. And then that as a gatekeeper unlocks so many other opportunities. But for a brand new artist who's coming in, who's never released anything, I would never say go for radio. I would say choose the one that you like naturally most interested in, because I think there's so much work that goes into the promotion of records properly that if you have an innate interest in a particular area, then that's going to propel you forward because you're gonna do the work. But if all of them is kind of like, I'm just starting out, I don't know where to start, I don't know what I don't know, and that's what's holding me back, I say streaming, because streaming numbers, unfortunately, are really public, and it's what all the other gatekeepers are looking at. So it's like, if you have a goal of signing to a label, they're looking at your streaming numbers. If you want to play at a festival, they're looking at your streaming numbers. If you want to get on radio, they're looking at your streaming numbers. And I think streaming numbers are the easiest to, you can do a lot. You have a lot of tools in your own hands to be able to do that. Whereas like music journalists, for example, you're relying on building up relationships. You're relying on a compelling narrative. There's a lot of luck and timing that comes into in like music press. So I would say streaming number one. Once you've got that down, then start to build on the other gatekeepers.
Got you. I definitely agree. And I want to come back to this idea of how do you get a network with new contacts to email. I want to come back to that. But going back to something you said earlier about you put it down into itemized chunks of days with tasks. What are some of those in the pre-marketing phase, building hype for the song, and some of those after the song comes out in that post-marketing phase?
Yep. Pre-marketing phase is all about the foundations. And so it's brand building and building assets and deciding on how much resource you're going to be putting into that section. So that the pre-marketing phase, you're coming up with all of the things that you're pushing out. So obviously we all know like the single artwork, what's the video that we're making? Doesn't need to be a fully blown music video. It can be just like, it can just be like a nice visual. What's the bio, obviously putting together your EPK, putting together the release narrative. What's the story? Where I always say with that is like, what's the headline? Where does that headline go? And what's the tweet? So not here's chunks and chunks and chunks of text of this is what this song's about, but really like, what would NME tweet about your track if that's where the world exists, and getting it into 140 characters. Nice. Because people, when they're going to share your music, they're going to be like, hey, check this out. It's what? And you need to answer what that is. And that's what marketing is. So it's like figuring out that. And then it's, if you brand new artist, you're also then figuring out like, you're doing a press photo shoot, you're figuring out your profile photos, you're figuring out, all that like boring nuts and bolts stuff, asset checklist stuff. There's heaps of them online. The things that I drill down into students is like, what is the narrative? What's the story? What are people gripping onto? A lot of people will think because they're creating all the content that it's getting dry and getting boring, but most likely most of your audience don't see what you post. So figuring out like how are you extending that through social media, how are you extending that through press, and what's the story. Then release week, you're trying to make as much noise as possible. That's when, so all of your promotional tactic, or a lot of your promotional tactics are going to hit in release week. Setting all of that up means that's where the 90 days comes from, to make it look like, oh, look, there's all people talking about this track.
Literally singing off the same song sheet as me, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Everything you're saying, completely music to my ears. I've heard this phrase that says, if you think you are posting so much that your audience is about to unfollow you, you're finally talking loud enough.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I think you have to feel like you're bombarding content in order to go beyond your existing network and spread over to audiences who've never heard about you.
Yeah.
And you need multiple touch points with a consumer for them to understand, I've seen an ad, I've seen a post, I've heard a snippet, I want to go and listen, pre-save, whatever. But even in all those examples, you gave a narrative and you gave the story. And you were saying, I'm playing this in a label. I think that's something that every marketer I've spoke to preaches about, but not enough artists maybe apply, is how do I dissect my song and extract a story out of it? How do you help some of the artists in your course, understand what the messages can be from their own song?
Yeah, we have a artist discovery workshop, the whole branding section, which basically takes them through. If I was sitting down with an artist, because in my process when I was freelancing or working at a label, I would sit down with an artist, I'd do an artist discovery session. That would be, I'd bring in the publicist, the creative director, the artist, manager, agent, if relevant, record label. We'd have a big meeting and I'd take them all through these 21 questions. That is basically meant to get at like, what is this music about? Where is the white space? And it goes through audience questions in order to be able to define the audience. It goes into the product. So what are you actually making? It goes into the artist motivations and kind of the psychology behind it. But all those questions are designed to get you to that narrative at the end. When artists, I've since developed it so you can do it on your own. And so DIY artists will do it with their collaborators or the producers or bandmates or even just reflective on themselves. That then leads them to kind of what the story is. And as I said earlier, tightening it to that point of making it like, what is the tweet? What is the headline? Like, how do you bring all of that information down in the most succinct way? Because short form content is the way that stories are told. And so that's the way that we usually get to the story. The ways that I teach, like being able to raise the stakes and constantly talk about your song, is just looking at what are the different types of ways. Like there's so many, I've got a library of all my Deep Cuts members, their best posts. And so that is a collaborative tool that anybody can use within the course, where they can see like, okay, this is another way I can do it. Or like, this is a meme I can create. This is like a contest type post. This is, a ways to talk about my achievements. Like there's so many different ways, but yeah, there's the strategy is really just like, what is your brand about? What is this project message? How do we mash those elements together to create a story prompt? And then I encourage artists to then go, if we're just talking about social media, then encourage them to go and batch content. So spend on the one day, write out all your stories or your captions. Then on another day, organize a shoot and then just mash those together and put it on autopilot so you don't have to think about it. Because the social media portion is the storytelling portion, and it's unfortunate because there are very few artists that have a good relationship with social media. If you do, it's like such a superpower. But for the most part, I'd say, I can't say everyone, it can't be conclusive, but I'd probably say like 9 out of 10 artists in my course hate it. And but it's like, the opportunity for audience growth and artist discovery there is too great to ignore it. And I haven't seen any marketing examples in 2023 that completely ignore social media, but I'd love to find some.
You'd be wondering if there are any left. I think what I heard you say there was that there's two parts and processes. There's one is crafting that narrative. And I really resonate with this idea of asking a circle of friends. So even if you don't have a team or a playlist promoter or a PR, radio plugger, etc. You can ask a trusted group of people, listen to this on a Zoom, and can we all just bounce around ideas? And then the second part of what I heard you say was then visually understanding what that output might look like in the context of a social post. And I think the idea of artist examples is powerful because you say, you take the story, you input it into a car performance or a showing your mum video or a opening in a speakeasy bar, right? Just playing that tune. I think there's a lot of directional piece of social media content that the idea stops the artist from creating the content. Yeah. You find that a lot with students that they want to promote the song, but they don't know visually how to do it.
Yeah, that. And then also I think it brings up a lot of uncomfortable feelings of like, it's boring. It's not as fun promoting music as it is making music. And it's confronting to put something out and it have really low numbers. And then you thinking like your family doesn't take you seriously, or like your friends think you're a loser, or, or like some random ex is like watching and laughing, or like, do you know what I mean? It's just, it's uncomfortable. There's also, it's also work. It takes ages. Like to create like a good TikTok, it takes ages. And so if you're an artist and you're like got another job, and you're also like making music and you have other creative pursuits and stuff, it's hard. It's hard work to make it look effortless. And so I think the thing that holds people back is like the almost like the fear of criticism in a way. And the fear of criticism and the fact that everything is so public. In order to be able to get success on these channels, you need to iterate in public. And if you're a brand new artist starting out and you're just starting with them, just figuring out what your brand is, it's pretty uncomfortable, and you don't have much resources. It's pretty uncomfortable to have the idea of what your image should be versus your ability to execute it. There's always going to be that gap, and that gap is what makes it feel so yuck. And it's like, I know this could be better. I know this could look better. I know this could be funnier. I know this could be more moving. I just don't have the camera, don't have the director, don't have the stylist, don't have, and that, but I've got to put this thing out.
Definitely. I can definitely like sense the panic that artists might go through when having to create content without having the game plan. Yeah. Like you say, when they sense low numbers, they kind of scale back.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things I've done in my group is I've built them a 42-day calendar.
Oh, cool.
And the 42 days is 7 days of pre-warm-up before the announcement's even made. Then 14 days from announcement to release date. 14 days from release date until they finish talking about the song in essence. And then a final 7 days to start some sort of user-generated TikTok challenge or Instagram Reels challenge. And I've said, we cannot miss a day, and we'll review the results after you've hit every single tick box on the list.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's what I found is like, if they were running out of ideas, I'm like, just follow the blueprint. Have your own ideas, go off and at least do the mechanic, but in a different execution style.
Yeah.
But I think what I can't really take is after 6 days, it's not working, I'm done with this.
Yeah, totally.
You ever face that with the artist?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, it doesn't work. And like, have you done the course? No. Okay, let's chat. Exactly. Go to video 1 and hit me on Discord.
I often feel like sometimes the artist is afraid of their own success. So they're unwilling to give the vulnerability that the post may require, and they lessen themselves in the caption, or they lessen their energy from singing at their maximum because they're worried of all those fears of what might my ex think, what might my high school friends, my work colleagues think of if they saw me giving it my all.
Yeah.
Can you relate to that and resonate with like someone scaling themselves back and not letting their own record hit the numbers it deserves?
Yeah, definitely. It's very public. The criticism and the adoration is really public. And often the adoration can be just as paralyzing as the criticism, because you are then now, an icon or a leader which is a huge responsibility that you didn't ask for. And then you've got all these people around you. And and so the mindset I've always heard, and what I believe is like, if you let yourself be loved, you can also let yourself be hated. And so you really have to detach yourself, the human, from yourself, the artist, the persona. And that is so much more difficult to do than if you are yourself, the human, Amber Horsburgh, working on YouTube Music, the app, who's got no feelings. And so I think the pressure or the fear of it getting great also brings in the criticism, but also brings in the intensity of fans, and also brings in the self-criticism or the self-talk of like, what if the next one's not good enough? Everyone's comparing this one to the last record. Like, it's all mental. And so, that would then manifest in ways of going, okay, I don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to be seen to take a big swing and be trying. Like, I want it to, I want this campaign to feel like the music was so great that it just found the audience that it deserved because the music was so good. But we all know that it's like any press mention has been pitched, and like any playlist ad has been pitched. And so it's not, the cream doesn't rise to the top.
I think there's all of that. And then there's also the complete flip side of the coin, where the artist can want to do the best rollout possible, but life is lifing. And a relative might be sick, a woman might be falling pregnant, for example, and their heart is wanting to do the rollout, but they have to put the other things in their universe first.
Yeah.
I think that's always a struggle when the days are catching up to you. And I'm glad you have that 90-day capacity to create art, create content, because the release day catches you quickly sometimes.
Yeah.
You ever found an experience where an artist is so close to the wire, or even yourself, but you've had so much other stuff happening at the same time, it's hard to prioritize?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's why you give yourself a long lead time, so you can budget a bit, so you can let life fall in the way. But you also, giving yourself enough time, and then also giving yourself enough time to like change your mind too. So it's like, oh, I actually, I didn't think that video concept is strong enough anymore. I've got this idea. But I think too, the other thing I'll always tell my students is like focusing on what the inputs are. So like, what can you do, rather than looking at what the results, and that's really hard to do. But I'll gamify it. So I'll say, okay, write your release plan and then give yourself awards for executing parts of it.
That's lovely.
So it's like, okay, you want to pitch 7 playlist curators. Once you've completed 7 playlist curators, you can go have a manicure. or once you have created 20 pieces of social content, you can go and have, take the afternoon off and have lunch or something like that. And just because if you do the inputs and you do the work, you will get the results. You just don't know where the results are going to come from. And there's, a lot of luck and timing that comes into it. And it's not a reflection of the music. It is a reflection of the promotional work that goes into it. So if you just focus on like, okay, in my calm state, and whatever you need to do to be calm, whether it's like you wake up in the morning, you go for a run, you have a coffee, you meditate, and then you know your brain's going to be great. You write down your intention of like, this is the plan that I'm going to execute. These are the awards I'm going to give myself at each level, and then just go and like you put the plan into a Google Sheet or a Trello board or Asana or whatever you do, Notion, whatever you do to manage yourself, and then you just execute. And then when you get to those levels of execution, you unlock those rewards. And I think that is a lot healthier. And then once you like onto the next single, you look back, you're like, oh, that video got 70,000 plays, sick. Rather than looking at it on day one being like, oh, isn't it bigger? Which is like a horrible feeling to have.
I really vibe with this idea of rewarding yourself rather than letting the industry reward you. So rather than thinking of a celebration is only deserving X number of plays, you hit a milestone, reward yourself. That's really nice.
Yeah, definitely. Because you can only control what you can control, like what you do.
Off that, do you often find, and this is my bugbear with the industry, I often think artists sometimes expect other team members to bring their streams in for them. So they think the ads team need to bring in stream, and the radio team and the PR team. but sometimes they're not accountable. Like, how many streams do I have to bring in from my own socials? Like, that's one of my quips is when an artist outsources too much, they take their foot off the gas. And I've always had that hustler mentality, like, no, you should be outworking your team and trying to drive more than them in some respects.
I can understand why though. Like if you've hired a publicist for a record campaign, you might be looking at $12,000.
Yeah.
Are you funding that yourself? Are you not getting results? I'd be pissed too. And I'd be thinking, why aren't I like why isn't these results coming in? But I totally agree with you. Like you as the artist or the CEO of your business, you're like running all of the different units and they're going to have their jurisdiction. So the radio team will bring in the radio players, but you also have to arm them with the materials of like, what are you sending them each couple of weeks to go, this is what's coming up. This is what's happening on my end. This is new. This review came in, like these hit these streams, or like same with your publicist. Like, you know, this is my promotional plan. This is what I've executed so far. This is more content that's coming through. You know, anything new that they can then go talk about. I think there's for sure a misnomer that when you get signed to a label, you get to just go back. Like you're like, sweet, it's done. I'm just going into the studio. I'm making music and being the artist because that's what I do. And often they're not. Like you now have a team. You're the boss of them, and so you have to manage them. Like no boss of a company just goes, okay, cool, I've got people now. I'm just gonna go play golf. I'm too much of a control freak to do that.
I'm learning this about you very fast, that you're a woman of systems and processes and tactics, and like you've put together a ton of resources over your time. Like, what kind of things do you give to an artist when they begin, when they get to like an intermediate level? Like, how do you arm them with that ammunition to give to the press? Like you just said, like you dropped the name of 5 tools there at least of things that were coming up. How do you help artists build that actual toolkit for themselves?
I built a lot of them for them. So a lot of it is in my course. You come through, you do all the, you get video lectures, but you also get like all my tools. So I was just building them at record labels. Like when we were chatting before, you were talking about having the same, or maybe we were just talking about it then, I can't remember, but having the same conversation over and over again. That's why I started Deep Cuts, was because my job at the record label was the punching bag between all of the different departments that you mentioned and management and the artist. And my calendar was like back to back to back, and I'd get to work and I'd just run. And it was like every single meeting having exactly the same conversation. It's just like, this is what digital is. This is the digital plan. This is what we're doing streaming. And so I just started to put it all into processes so I could free up my own time. But I was also like, you just give someone, a blog post on digital best practices. We wouldn't have to spend the time talking about digital best practices. We could get straight into concepting ideas, or, the things that are important, or the things that people hire me for. And so a lot of it's built out for them. And then if it's not built out for them, I give them the process to build it out for themselves. So, for example, you get my release plan, which is the 90-day plan that takes you from 90 days before release right up to 6 weeks after release. Every single task that a major label would do, and then it's got different levels. So it's like, if you're an independent artist of one and you're doing everything yourself, here's all the tasks that you don't need to do, but it's good to see, just so you know this is where you can grow, or this is where you could outsource, and this is the minimum viable stuff. And then I give the artist processes to take that and go, all right, put it into your own project management. So if you just project manage literally through paper and a pen, which some of my students do, this is what you would do, and this is how you do it. So yeah, it's all designed to I either give them the tool straight, so they just got the shortcut, or they get the process to make it themselves.
I think it's the difference there between like giving a man a fish versus teaching them to fish.
Yeah.
What I'm loving that you do is that you give them a blueprint and you say, now make it your own. That's what I'm hearing you say. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have to, because in my latest group of students, I've had like Indigenous First Nations artists in the same room with a pop act, in the same room with a singer-songwriter, in the same room with somebody who does world music, a jazz artist, a classical artist. the foundational principles of marketing and the way the industry works is exactly the same from any of these artists, but that you have to make it your own. Otherwise, you can't give the two plans together the same. You'd be setting artists up for failure if you did that.
I think the beautiful thing, right, with this sort of approach is that the artist gets everything and there's no question marks anymore. It's just, how am I approaching this?
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about that is you're going to give them all the examples, you can give them all the templates, and they can add their flair into making it their own. I think a lot of artists that I've encountered, they struggle identifying themselves and their future direction. But when you give the probing questions, like you said, the 21 questions that you ask them, they reflect upon themselves and the answers manifest like that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then how do you think like artists within a rollout balance their other passion projects, their other lifestyle aspects? Like it can't all just be intensively promoting this record. They have to like pepper in a bit of their own selves throughout that process. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think you having a good understanding of why will this project fail. So asking those questions first before the project actually fails, that will help you identify the pitfalls in yourself or your processes, and then you can mitigate against that. So that's one. We used to do that in ad agencies all the time. They'd be like a pre-mortem, which is a real ghastly term for it. But it was basically just before you get into a campaign, you get everyone that's working in the room into a room and you all write on Post-it notes, why will this fail? And then it just tells you what you're up against, what your personal challenges are. And then you can put processes in to mitigate against that. So I asked my students that that ranges. So for one artist, it was, I'm building a house and that takes up all my time. And I was like, okay, cool. How many hours a day is that taking up? When else do you have brain power to be able to work on this stuff? For another artist, it's I'm touring. So I'm touring with another band and that's too intense. So it's like, okay, when is an ideal release date for this particular project where you can actually allocate it? And then let's look at your 6, 9, and 12 month focus areas, and then we can do that. For another artist, it's my ADHD brain, and so it's like, okay, cool. Let's look at how do we hire a virtual assistant and think about ways that we can start to put your own processes and teach somebody else to take off the load of work that you really struggle with. So doing that kind of upfront pre-mortem work. I don't know, a nicer name would be just troubleshoot. Sounds kind of jargony.
But it's inspired what you built there. That's amazing.
But yeah, that, and then what, and because that will change for every artist. And then from there, it's really about identifying when are you going to prioritize this work? Because the thing is like everyone doesn't have time, but it's the way that you're able to prioritize things. And if you can chip away at it, that's going to be a lot better than allocating chunks of time. So like rather than going, all right, I'm going to bang this all out on a weekend, that's putting way too much pressure on you to perform that weekend. But if you can go, all right, I have to work my day job during the day. My brain works, like my creative brain is better at night. I can probably do 1 hour of really solid writing time or creative thinking time. That would probably be better than me. That is probably more effective than you're trying to do 3 hours during the morning. So if you can understand how you work best, then you can also set yourself up for success. But yeah, all that that stuff in the afternoon. And then once my baby's asleep, I work on my actual art project. So I make leather jackets. And so what I'll do is after dinner, I put an hour and I'll just do an hour from like 7:30 till 8:30, and then I just call it quits. And it would be great to be able to work on leather jackets like 6 hours a day, but it makes no money. But it feels really nice. So I put it in that slot.
Amber, honestly, I've loved this. Thank you so much.
Oh,
where can the people watching this connect with you if they want to find out more about Deep Cuts, about the Fanbase Accelerator, and all the other projects you have going on?
Yeah, for sure. I'm probably best on Instagram, which is just @deepcuts.co. And then if you yeah, if you send me a DM and say that you listen to this, I'm happy to give you some freebies, some maybe discount to the course, if that would be good. I don't know what people would like, but yeah, happy to do that. And then I would say probably best don't email me. I'm like fastest on Instagram, so just either DM me there, I would say. And then yeah, TikTok, I'm music marketing tips. YouTube, I'm Amber Horsburgh. Usually a quick Google search for Amber Horsburgh, you'll find everything.
I highly recommend you on the socials because yeah, it's punchy content. It fires me up seeing what you're posting, and we're in the same lane as well. So I definitely recommend like hitting you up on social for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.